She had been placed at the very back of the lecture hall, far from the telescopes and scientific clusters, simply because of her old wool coat, thick glasses, and the canvas bag full of dog-eared books slung over her shoulder. "She probably thinks she's here for some stargazing fun," someone sneered while a female doctor added dryly. "Are you one of the guests or the cleaning staff?" No one knew. She was the mind behind a mystery that would soon upend the world of astronomy, and they would all regret ever mocking her. In that cramped seat, Mia Hart remained utterly still as the remarks crackled around her. A trio of graduate students in crisp suits wearing the insignia of prestigious universities on their name badges glanced her way and smirked. One of them leaned in toward his friend voice, raised just enough for Mia to hear, "Maybe she's lost. Look at that coat, it's seen better days. Maybe the 80s. Their laughter bounced off the polished floors. Another lowered his glasses and observed her like a curious specimen, then shrugged as if he were doing her some huge favor by acknowledging her existence. Meanwhile, the female doctor who had demanded to know if she was staff pursed her lips in clear disdain. The older woman's hair was in a perfect twist, her expensive watch glinting in the overhead lighting. Several other attendees pretended not to notice the cruelty, which only made the scene more piercing. Yet for all their jabs, Mia never shifted in her seat. She made no move to defend herself, no glare of outrage. She merely adjusted the strap of her canvas bag, keeping her posture straight. In the next row, a young man fiddled with a fancy gold pen, flicking glances over his shoulder at her every so often until he finally turned around. "We're about to have the big talk on cosmic ray anomalies," he said in a tone dripping with condescension. "Sure, you're in the right place. This might be over your head." He made a show of pointing toward the stage where a panel of eminent astrophysicists prepared to speak. Mia regarded him with a brief lift of her gaze, eyes magnified by those thick lenses. Her expression showed no trace of hurt or fear, but the man's smug smile only grew. "Just letting you know," he added, tapping his pen on his pad of paper. "Wouldn't want you to waste your time." The woman beside him snickered behind manicured nails, leaning away from Mia, as though her simple attire might be contagious. 2 seats to Mia's left, a self-proclaimed space entrepreneur named Hans Mortimer loudly carried on about how he'd funded half the new observatory wing with a generous donation. Dressed in a sleek black turtleneck and wearing cologne that smelled like money, he seemed determined to remind everyone of his wealth at every turn. His voice boomed even when addressing the person right beside him. "I bet she's just here because they needed some diversity. Am I right?" he joked to his companion, winking. "You know, these events, they love putting random faces in the crowd so the press photos look good. Probably gave her a free ticket." His statement drew short, uneasy chuckles from those who wanted to stay in his good graces. Mia listened without blinking, her shoulders set in a steady line. At the front of the hall, the conference moderator tapped the microphone to begin the session. The hush that fell over the crowd came as a small relief, but Mia noticed at least 3 people still whispering about her as though the quiet offered a prime opportunity to dissect her presence. A woman with carefully styled gray hair, who had introduced herself earlier as a longtime NASA consultant, caught Mia's eye and gave her an openly dismissive look. She turned to her colleague and murmured, "If she's who I think she is, some public lottery winner, right? That means she knows nothing. This is a specialized environment." Then she sighed as though pitying Mia was too exhausting to bother with. After the opening remarks, the crowd dispersed into smaller groups. Clusters formed around the best vantage points, some near massive telescopes placed on the observatory deck, others around the demonstration tables stacked with equipment. Mia waited briefly, closing her eyes as bodies shoved by, making no room for her. She touched the frayed edge of her coat, the material once her mother's, though only she knew that. A pungent memory flickered. She had seen this coat on a coat hook in a grand foyer lined with marble floors, had once stood on tiptoe to reach her mother's gentle hand. But there in the Colorado mountain chill, the garment merely branded her an outsider. No one offered to share a telescope or a seat. Instead, the event organizers directed her to an unoccupied side bench near the back, as if placing her out of everyone's direct line of sight would keep the conference's prestige unmarred. A chunk of the day passed in petty humiliations. During a coffee break, Mia was nudged aside, literally elbowed away, as a group of well-dressed individuals debated the composition of exoplanet atmospheres. She watched them exchange complicated terms, spectroscopic data, radial velocity anomalies, and occasionally they threw a condescending glance in her direction. "Careful," said one, lifting a brow. "She might try to join the conversation." Mia said nothing. She lifted a small paper cup to her lips, tasted the coffee, but showed no reaction. She simply found an empty side table and stood with her back perfectly straight, almost regal, though no one recognized that subtle dignity. Out of the corner of her eye, she noticed a young conference volunteer approach with a forced smile. The volunteer said in a hushed voice, "Excuse me, some staff members are, well, they're short-handed. Would you mind cleaning up a few of the leftover items on the benches outside? I'm sorry, but they told me you wouldn't mind." Mia remained silent for a moment, then gave a single nod. In the corridor collecting scattered pamphlets and used cups, she briefly paused before a large photograph mounted on the wall. It showed the founder of the observatory, a stern man in a tailored suit shaking hands with a senator. The caption read, "Heritage, Discovery, Excellence." Mia's grip on the pamphlets tightened. For a fraction of a second, her gaze flickered as she recalled a hallway of a different kind, tall windows with thick drapes and a portrait of her father. She set the pamphlets down carefully and stared at the photograph as if reading some coded message. Then, without a word, she picked the papers back up and continued her task. That evening, the real humiliations began in earnest. A major discussion about a mysterious deep space signal was scheduled, a static-laced frequency that had everyone from top physicists to wealthy hobbyists buzzing with speculation. The largest telescope on site was aimed toward the coordinates in question, and the camp's bigwigs crammed into a separate control room for an exclusive briefing. Mia was, of course, not invited. She ended up standing by the door outside the frosted glass. Every now and then, staff bustled past with stacks of documents or trays of refreshments. One staffer nearly shoved the door into Mia, not seeing her in the dim light. She didn't flinch, though the corner of the door caught her shoulder. She merely let the staffer shuffle inside, carrying pastries for the VIPs. An hour later, the door opened and a tall, confident woman with an ID badge that read, "Dr. Anastasia Marks," stepped out. Dr. Marks was famed in astrophysics circles for her brash style and brilliant calculations. Dressed in a sleek burgundy blazer, she took one look at Mia, then jerked her head. "You," Dr. Marks said, "we need an extra note-taker. There's a seat in this corner, don't breathe a word, but you can scribble down highlights." Without waiting for an answer, she turned and walked back into the control room. Mia followed, taking a seat so far in the corner that the overhead projector beam barely touched her face. Inside, the tension was palpable. Charts and star maps lined the walls. A hush fell as a heated debate raged about the origin of the signal. Someone insisted it was cosmic background interference. Another believed it might be evidence of an undiscovered celestial body. The entire time they spoke as if Mia didn't exist, even though she was dutifully capturing every word in neat, precise handwriting. Then suddenly a cocky voice in the front row called out, "Why don't we ask our cleaning lady to weigh in, Mia Hart, right? Hey, you might have a brand new theory, like aliens maybe." A rumble of laughter followed. Dr. Marks didn't protest. She merely observed with a bored tilt of her head. Hans Mortimer, the wealthy donor, turned around in his seat to watch the spectacle. "Yes, come on," he goaded. "Don't be shy. Enlighten us." Another group, presumably graduate students, whipped out their phones as if ready to capture Mia's answer and broadcast it as comedic relief. The crowd clearly expected a meek, fumbling reply. Mia shifted. Her hand holding the pencil paused. She rose slowly, leaving her notepad on the table. A hush spread across the entire room. For several heartbeats she said nothing, only allowed the pencil to roll back and forth. Then her voice, quiet but controlled, cut through the tension. She used scientific terms that half the panel seemed unfamiliar with. She questioned their measured decibel flux ratio, pointed out that the amplitude in the data had been incorrectly interpreted, and asked if they'd considered a peculiar phenomenon involving neutron star collisions. The moment she referenced a rare pattern of gamma-ray bursts correlated with certain magnetar spin-down rates, a stunned silence replaced the mocking laughter. One by one, the scientists exchanged looks of alarm or fascination. Then from the back came a faint but unmistakable sound of applause. All eyes swung around to see an elderly professor, a man whose nameplate read Dr. Rutherford, bringing his hands together in slow, deliberate claps. He stood with difficulty, leaning on his cane. At last he announced in a gravelly voice, someone who understands the real nuance here. A ripple of agitation swept the room. Whispers started, and some of the attendees looked deeply uncomfortable. Hans Mortimer turned pink, glaring down at the table. The cocky voice that had teased Mia earlier muttered an apology, but his words were lost in the swell of conversation that followed. Mia quietly resumed her seat, picking up the pencil as if nothing had happened. In the hours after that dramatic revelation, the rumor mill exploded. Who was this woman? Where had she learned such specialized astrophysical theory? People tried asking her directly, but Mia simply bowed her head or stepped aside, offering no personal information. The official organizers found themselves in an awkward position. They had relegated Mia to menial tasks, only to discover she possessed a mastery that rivaled their star guests. Dr. Anastasia Marks was one of the few who dared to approach Mia for a formal introduction. "We may have misjudged you," Dr. Marks said briskly, her expression taut with professional wariness. "We'd like to see your credentials, or at least talk about them." Mia responded with a small nod. There was no trace of triumph on her face, though her steady gaze betrayed a quiet alertness, as if she was used to standing on shifting ground. By the next morning, the conference was in a flurry, not only because of the mysterious signal, but because a journalist on site was preparing a bombshell article. He had recognized something in Mia's explanation, a style or a set of references that matched several anonymous papers published in top-tier journals. There had been countless theories swirling around the so-called MH who had sent groundbreaking insights to nature without a single bio or institutional affiliation. Editors published them because they were too brilliant to ignore, even though the author refused interviews and used a simple initial for a signature. Whispers now claimed that Mia Hart was that elusive MH. When the journalist finally posted a breaking note to the newswires, the conference staff devoured every word. It highlighted that those seismic shifts in theoretical physics, the ones that had made headlines for months, were actually penned by Mia. The article also suggested that some in the academic world had tried to contact her, offering fellowships and lectureships, but she'd vanished. Now it seemed she had surfaced out of nowhere at this winter camp in the Colorado mountains. The tension was electric. People who had insulted her only hours before suddenly wanted to curry favor. The ones who had ignored her presence lined up to ask polite, half-baked questions. "You'll forgive our earlier oversight, won't you?" asked one of the graduates who had laughed so cruelly. But Mia offered no direct reply, only a thin, civil smile. Midday, she stepped outside into the biting cold air, her coat buttoned tightly, her hands hidden in its pockets. The snow crunched underfoot in the courtyard between the observatory halls. It was then that she caught sight of a familiar silhouette stepping out of a sleek black car. The man was tall, dark-haired, and wore an expensive overcoat. An emblem on the car door hinted at a powerful firm, or perhaps a family crest, something only the very wealthy recognized. Mia paused near the courtyard's stone bench, and her shoulders lifted barely a fraction. This man's presence didn't startle her. Instead, her posture suggested acceptance, maybe even inevitability. The man locked eyes with Mia, nodding once. Some behind him, presumably staff or local officials, seemed uncertain how to greet a visitor of such stature. She turned away, first continuing around the corner of the building, leaving the swirl of speculation behind. The memory of a marble foyer flooded into her mind, unbidden men in sharp suits discussing deals worth billions, her father's voice resonating down a massive corridor. It pressed against her, but she kept walking, boots leaving methodical prints in the snow. Now as then, she had no interest in flaunting power or money. She had left that life behind, refusing to trade her curiosity and independence for a seat at the gilded table. Yet that world had a habit of following her. The camp's official schedule resumed that afternoon. A fresh wave of disapproval or awe filled the atmosphere. Some couldn't stand how easily Mia had overturned their assumptions. Others scrambled to congratulate her. Dr. Marks, never one to mince words, cornered Mia in the hallway. "You've done more than just impress an old professor," she said, arms folded. "I had no idea you were behind those papers. It's a pity you didn't come forward sooner." Why hide? Mia offered no explanation. She merely pulled a single dog-eared book from her canvas bag and handed it over. Dr. Marks glanced at the text, Advanced Gravitational Wave Theory. On the inside cover in neat pen were scribbled notes that seemed older than Mia's current presence. Dr. Marks blinked as though reading a ghostly conversation. Then Mia retrieved the book, bowed slightly, and walked away. That evening, a hush of alarm rippled through the camp as the data from the primary telescope trained on that puzzling signal revealed a more urgent threat. The feed displayed on monitors in the main control lab indicated an unexpected shift in orbital debris near a region crowded with satellites. Some suspected a collision was brewing, one that could scatter a chain reaction of space junk, endangering future missions and possibly harming people on Earth if fragments rained down. Panic ensued. The top scientists sprang into frantic calculations, scrawling equations on whiteboards, shouting for datasets. Hans Mortimer, the wealthy investor, demanded answers. The retired Dr. Rutherford held his head in his hands, lamenting how no one had foreseen this. In the midst of the chaos, Mia quietly entered the control lab. She stood for a moment, scanning the reams of data rolling across the screens. Her breath was calm, measured. Without waiting for permission, she picked up a marker and began adjusting the figures on the whiteboard. Her handwriting was tight and deliberate, a waterfall of numbers that overcame the scrawl from the other scientists. She circled certain coordinates, drew arrows, repositioned lines. At first, no one noticed. They were too busy arguing. Then Dr. Marks caught sight of her. A hush fell. Mia's final step was to add a small cluster of notations in the corner, an alternative trajectory. She nodded at the board, stepped back, then set the marker down. Doctor. Rutherford, roused from his despair, hobbled forward to read the revised model. A moment passed as he digested it, then he gasped. This changes everything, he said, turning to stare at Mia. You found a path that eliminates half our risk. Another scientist tested the calculations on a computer simulator, eyes widening as the predicted collisions diminished drastically. The entire room buzzed. How did you see that pattern? Someone asked Mia. She only blinked in acknowledgement, her silence heavier than any boasting. Word spread quickly that her recalculations had revealed a time window for altering the orbits of crucial satellites. Mission control specialists, those off-site with the actual authority to shift satellites, were contacted. They worked through the night based on Mia's model. By morning, a near-catastrophic collision had been averted or at least postponed. Some hardware would be lost, but not on the scale originally feared. The difference was hundreds, possibly thousands of lives and billions of dollars in infrastructure saved. A local news network arrived at the camp to broadcast the incredible story how an unassuming woman all but ignored had spotted the crucial detail no one else had noticed. Facing the cameras, the same people who'd insulted her just days earlier now stood sheepishly behind the podium. Dr. Marks gave a terse statement. We owe a debt of gratitude to Ms. Hart, she said, voice hitching on the word gratitude. Hans Mortimer cleared his throat unwillingly, stepping forward to echo that sentiment. I think we all learned a lesson in humility, he mumbled, glancing at Mia, who stood to the side, her hands in her coat pockets. She didn't shift or gloat, though a flicker of acknowledgement in her gaze said she heard every word. It was not the apology of a friend, but it would do. Soon enough, the International Astronomical Union sent representatives to the camp for an emergency convening. Even those normally too proud to acknowledge outsiders found themselves at a moral crossroads. The rumor of Mia's advanced theories, plus her decisive role in preventing a large-scale orbital disaster, was too big to ignore. At a hastily arranged ceremony, they offered her an honorary medal, something they had never done for an individual without a formal academic or institutional background. For the first time, announced one official, clearing his throat as though the words resisted him. We honor a modest woman whose quiet brilliance saved the future of observational astronomy. Cameras flashed. Applause broke out in halting waves. All eyes landed on Mia, waiting for a reaction. She walked to the small podium. The medal was in a velvet box, held out to her by a trembling official. Mia touched its edge, then gently closed the box without pinning the medal to her coat. A hush settled over the audience, who must have expected a triumphant acceptance. But Mia merely set the box down on the podium's edge. Her gaze moved across the crowd, those who had mocked her, those who had realized their error too late, and those who had never seen her coming. I just hope, she said quietly, each word well chosen, that from now on, every question, no matter who it comes from, is taken seriously. The universe doesn't care about titles. Sometimes the greatest answers come from the voice you almost ignored. Then she stepped away, leaving a stunned silence in her wake. Within hours, the world outside the camp exploded with more coverage, but Mia took no part in the interviews. She had no interest in boasting. She spent her last evening at the camp in the newly established Mia Hart Corner, a small nook near the observation deck set aside for open discourse. A modest plaque read, "Here all questions are welcome." She stood before the plaque, her fingertips grazing the engraved letters. Officials insisted the corner remain for any visitor, student, hobbyist, or caretaker to ask anything they wished without judgment. And it was there that Mia lingered, sometimes answering softly, sometimes simply observing the faces that approached. As the camp wound down, many found themselves tiptoeing around Mia, uncertain how to address her. Rumors about her private life still swirled, that she came from an elite family with vast influence, that her father had been a titan of industry, that she had chosen a path of scholarship over luxury. No one had proof other than the glimpses of wealth that seemed to float around her, like the man in the black car, or the quiet respect from certain staff who recognized something regal in her posture. But Mia made no moves to confirm or deny anything. On the final morning, a hush swept through the cold corridors when a different sleek vehicle arrived. Out stepped a man carrying the aura of quiet authority. Tall, with a single silver streak in his hair, he wore a simple but impeccably tailored coat and no tie. One look at his features, sharp jaw, intense eyes, and the onlookers seemed to sense that he was not just anyone. He paused near the front entrance, scanning the crowd. He found Mia without difficulty, even in the throng of guests checking out. The man inclined his head in a gesture of greeting. Those around him parted, as though he was a king, forging a path. Dr. Marks, Hans Mortimer, and a small gathering of powerful personalities stared, uncertain whether to approach or keep their distance. The man said a single word, Mia. She met his gaze with cool composure. If others expected her to run into his arms or greet him with servility, they were disappointed. Instead, she acknowledged him with a subtle dip of her head, as one might greet a respected equal. The man's presence alone seemed to deflate the lingering arrogance of those who had once ridiculed her. Hans Mortimer stepped back, face drawn. Dr. Marks kept quiet, no longer the commanding figure in the room. A hush fell. Whispers flared. Was he a billionaire partner, a family benefactor? Mia's silent acceptance of his presence suggested a deeper connection. One of the assistants tried to stammer a greeting, but the man hardly spared them a glance. He was there for Mia. In that moment, every rumor about her background felt validated. Some recalled they had seen him featured in business magazines tied to philanthropic endeavors, or rumored to be the hidden power behind massive global acquisitions. He set a gentle hand against the small of Mia's back, guiding her toward the door. She allowed it, her head high, her dignity unwavering. The watchers who had insulted her felt a chill. They seemed to realize how catastrophic their earlier cruelty might become now that they grasped who Mia truly was. Yet there was no move for vengeance, no demand for retribution. On the contrary, Mia simply collected her canvas bag, walked out with the man through the swirling winter air, and paused only once beside a row of photographs that commemorated the event. A volunteer fumbled with a camera, asking if she wanted a final snapshot. Mia reached to straighten a photograph on the wall. It was slightly off-kilter. Her expression gave away nothing more than a calm satisfaction at seeing order restored. Then she moved on, leaving the volunteer to capture a single shot of her retreating figure. Those who had once thrown insults found themselves truly disgraced, but it was not because Mia proclaimed their transgressions. Instead, their own shame combined with the newscast's coverage of their initial scorn stripped them of respect. The female doctor who had demanded to know if Mia was the cleaning staff discovered her upcoming research grant canceled by an anonymous investor withdrawal rumor said that the man in the black coat had quietly shifted his support. Hans Mortimer, desperate to maintain his social standing, offered a frantic public apology, which circulated in official meeting minutes. It was read at the next Astronomy Committee gathering, and those present only shook their heads. Dr. Marks, though not entirely disgraced, was forced to acknowledge that her swift judgments had nearly cost them a monumental discovery. She fell silent in the face of the committee's formal reprimand. No one needed to break them. They undid themselves by their own pride. The day Mia left, snow fell heavier than before, coating the mountain roads in a thick blanket. She walked through the swirling flakes, her hood pulled up, that old wool coat holding firm against the chill. Behind her, the observatory, once the seat of her humiliation, now displayed a small sign announcing Mia Hart Corner. A few students huddled there, flipping through reference books and taking notes, each free to voice their curiosities without fear of mockery. Overhead, the sky stretched wide, indifferent to these human dramas. Mia paused at the edge of the parking lot, hesitating only to brush snow from the hem of her pants. She looked over her shoulder at the sprawling building with its high dome and shimmering telescopes, then turned away to disappear into the waiting car. She thought no one was watching, but an older woman in a security uniform stood at the window inside, tears glistening in her eyes. That woman had witnessed the entire arc of Mia's story, watched her come in, wearing a tattered coat, ridiculed by the privileged, only to leave in quiet triumph. The security guard pressed a hand to the glass as though in salute. Mia didn't see it. She simply slipped away, leaving behind a legend that would ripple through the scientific community for years. Rumors persisted. Some said Mia returned to a secluded estate hidden behind tall iron gates where her father's portrait hung in the main hall. Others claimed she spent her days writing new theories under a pseudonym, ensuring the world remained focused on the ideas rather than the person. And a few, including Dr. Rutherford, insisted she continued to appear at small science gatherings in unremarkable clothes, silently testing whether curiosity could still triumph over arrogance. No one ever captured a definitive answer. Months later, the observatory campus unveiled a permanent plaque in the hallway leading to the main telescope. It read simply, "Let every voice be heard," and beside it hung a photograph of Mia from that final day, her face partially turned away, hair dusted with snow, a single hand brushing the flakes from her coat. Beneath the photograph, smaller letters read, "Dedicated, in honor of Mia Hart, who taught us the universe has room for every question." The night of the unveiling, the staff had arranged a quiet ceremony. Dr. Rutherford, shaky on his cane, spoke to a handful of journalists. She refused formal honors but insisted on a corner where anyone, be they janitor or genius, could ask openly. Perhaps that's the best legacy of all. A hush followed his words. Then, as though the wind itself heard the moment, a small draft rattled the windows, making them shiver with the mountain's chill. One reporter had tears in her eyes but said nothing, simply scribbled in her notepad. A custodian from the facility stood in the corner, remembering how Mia had once helped gather empty coffee cups without protest. For those older women who read Mia's story or heard it told in a gentle voice during the next symposium, there was a deep resonance. They recognized the discipline of silent endurance under scorn, the way a person can hold steady in the face of belittlement and prejudice. Some said they saw themselves in Mia's slow, resolute movements, her refusal to stoop to petty squabbles. Many felt renewed, as if all the times they were dismissed or mocked had been given quiet justice through Mia's story. In that sense, Mia's actions did not just save satellites or rewrite astrophysical theories. She offered a different kind of salvation, one that made invisible struggles visible at last. Not long after the unveiling, a private letter arrived at the observatory addressed simply to the staff. Inside was a handwritten note on thick, cream-colored paper. "Continue your research. Never fear to ask." It bore no signature, only two initials, M.H. A small donation check accompanied it, a sum large enough to fund open-access programs for underprivileged students who dreamed of the stars. The staff recognized the simple scrawl, and they wept at the kindness of someone who had been so poorly treated in that very place. They vowed that no one in that building would ever again endure mockery for their appearance or background. And so life moved on in the Colorado mountains. Seasons passed, the snows melted, and fresh-faced astronomy enthusiasts arrived at the camp each year, some with battered coats and dog-eared books, stepping carefully over the threshold. Yet from that time forward, they found a corner bearing Mia's name, a space free of judgment, a place to ask the naive questions that might one day prove vital. On the final day of each camp session, organizers told the story of how one quiet woman dressed in worn clothes had outshone every titled expert. By then, people no longer gasped with disbelief. It had become legend. Sometimes in a city far from the mountains, a black car would pass under tall wrought iron gates at dusk. Inside the stone mansion, a grand piano might sit in a quiet parlor, a stack of manuscripts perched on its polished surface. Footsteps would echo in the marble hall, leading to a portrait of a stern-faced patriarch. A gloved hand would pause, adjusting the dusty frame. Then, in a library lined with books from floor to ceiling, a coat threadbare but cherished would be hung with care. The occupant of that mansion would sit at a heavy desk, open a leather-bound notebook, and let her pen flow across fresh pages of equations. The next day, those equations might fly off in a plain envelope to a scientific journal, unadorned by fancy letterhead. Still, the world would talk of her as the quiet genius, the uncredited savior of astronomy. They would never stop guessing what kind of wealth or power she truly held, though by then they understood it scarcely mattered. All that counted was the flame of curiosity she kept alight, a flame that lit the path for anyone who might otherwise be shunned. For Mia, the realm of knowledge stood apart from petty judgments. She carried on unaffected, her silent composure unbroken. And perhaps this more than anything was how she found peace, not by lashing out at those who once sneered at her coat or forced her to pick up trash, but by quietly proving that the deepest worth of a person is never measured by appearance or pomp. The cosmos, after all, sees no difference in the hearts that quest after its secrets. In that sense, she left behind more than discoveries. She left behind a testament that no title, no wealth, no status can match the power of a determined mind. When the night sky glitters above those snowy peaks, you can almost sense her presence in the hush between the stars. It's as though she stands there still, adjusting the lens, patiently guiding others to see what they might overlook. And if you stroll down the corridor leading to the observation deck, you will pass the Mia Hart corner just before the final stairs. There, someone might be hunched over a battered notebook, scribbling furious notes about an undiscovered galaxy or a new approach to orbital debris. Sometimes they leave little index cards pinned to the bulletin board, a question for anyone to answer or an observation about a faint star cluster. Sometimes a caretaker or a visiting child will respond in a shaky hand, unafraid of ridicule. In the end, Mia's story remains a quiet miracle. Each retelling reminds us how a simple woman mocked and dismissed shattered the boundaries of established science and rescued countless lives along the way. She never sought gratitude. She never asked for praise. She only stood unwavering in her self-appointed place among the cosmos. And for anyone who hears her name, a warmth lingers like the soft glow of a distant star guiding us home. May we all learn in some small way to question more, judge less, and remember that dignity rests not in outward displays of power, but in the steadfast light of a heart resolute in its truth. Sometimes the greatest brilliance comes from the soul we almost overlooked. So whenever you find yourself standing on the sidelines, wearing an old coat, carrying a bag of books, or feeling unseen by those who think themselves mighty, remember her story. Remember that somewhere in the hush of that high-altitude observatory, one humble figure changed the course of history. And remember that there is always a place for your voice in the corners, named for the quiet heroes who never demanded the spotlight, yet earned it beyond all measure. For those who seek answers, let her example be a sign that you do not need to cry or shout to transform the world. You need only stand firm in your truths and let your actions speak. In the vast expanse of the universe, the loudest echoes of our deeds often come from the gentlest steps we take. And if you should ever visit that snowy camp in the mountains and pass by the plaque in the corridor, pause a moment, feel that hush of recognition. It is the hush of respect. It is the hush of humility. It is the hush of 1,000 unspoken apologies for those who once turned away. And in that hush, you may find your own strength returning like an ember stoked to new life. Listen closely, and you might hear the whisper that says all questions matter. All voices belong. The quiet soul in tattered wool might hold the key to saving us all. Thank you for reading this remembrance of Mia Hart's path, a path that began in humiliation yet soared to uncharted heights. In the end, let us each carry her story in our hearts. And if you ever feel moved to share your thoughts or speak for those whose voices go unheard, please do so. Let's keep her spirit of open inquiry alive. Let's keep believing that anyone anywhere can be the one to glimpse the hidden wonders of our infinite sky.